Okay. One Mississippi, two Mississippi.
Hello, this is Howard Owens with the Batavian. We're doing another live interview, this time with County Manager Gsell. And although we're still early in the coronavirus stuff, there's concerns coming up about economic impact on local government. So we want to get kind of his sense of what's going on and how that might impact local government. So, Jay, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, Howard. So we can start with, obviously, there's been a significant lack of activity, particularly with regard to one of our primary resources, which is sales tax here in the county and in the whole state of New York, obviously. Our affiliates, associates, and advocates down in Albany, NYSAC, have provided some general information so far with regard to, based on the severity and or the duration of this kind of C-19 related lack of business, that our impact as far as sales tax could range from anywhere between 1.8 million and 5.6 million on an annual 12-month basis, loss of sales tax revenue to a small county budget like ours. But again, those are just projections based on, some modeling that they have done. We locally do not yet have anything that has looked at something going out into the future. But obviously, with this being the second largest resource and soon to be probably eclipsed in a couple of years, even property taxes as far as county budget is concerned, it's of a major concern to us. We've only seen so far the first quarter payments that Scott German received from taxation and finance. But again, this was just before sort of the bottom fell out and the, shall we say, isolation / quarantine, whatever other adjective you want to use with regard to how we're dealing with flattening the curve and dealing with the C-19 implications, even at this end of the state, is something that obviously has us significantly concerned. At the same time, the governor and the two other members of the Senate and the House, Senate and the Assembly, are trying to put together a 2020-2021 state budget, which again is now gone from a $4 to $6 billion problem to a $10 to $15 billion problem as far as being out of balance. A lot of the same revenue problems that the county's looking at, except obviously for them it's the money that comes out of Wall Street, as well as the significant real estate and tax investments. For us and the state, obviously, sales tax is, again, a big revenue. And just as we're seeing a diminution and are likely to see it going forward, the state will be looking at the same thing and is looking at it as far as what they do to adopt a budget for the next 12 months.
So with sales tax, what percentage of the budget is that, and what sort of things does that fund?
Well, it represents in toto for the county somewhere around $20 million between what we use in the operating budget, which is what we call our 3%. And then since its inception, we've typically used the additional 1% that was enacted in the mid-90s for basically capital projects, asset acquisition, debt service, but also in some cases to help us balance a potential fiscal year. And so that's another almost $4.5 to $5 million. Again, it depends on what our proceeds have looked like. Basically we share, at this point, our guaranteed contract with the city of Batavia with the new 40-year agreement, and then also doing revenue distribution with the other communities in the county, the villages and towns. Nothing so far has been impacted yet because the payments haven't started under the new agreements. And those are the kind of money we're looking at in toto on a 12 months basis.
So you're looking at basically what between a 5% 10% drop in sales tax?
Very conceivably, and again, to some extent we're in uncharted territory. Understand that about 18% of any of the tax that is generated here is from motor fuels. And so while the price has also been dropping here, we've also seen, and I can tell you anecdotally, just sitting in this building here at the juncture of 5 and 63, both the number of trucks and the number of vehicles on the road every day here in Genesee County looks like it has dropped fairly significantly, hence less travel, hence less purchase of gasoline. Same thing now that the tourism market and the hotel market has pretty much disappeared temporarily, and same thing with Batavia Downs. All of those are things that contribute to people buying motor fuel and helping us with sales tax here in Genesee County.
So you've been in this job a while, and we know you're
A
coming
few,
up on
26 plus.
So you've been through a couple of recessions, but this is very different. This is, I mean, we're having this like precipitous drop. This was nothing that most recessions come on gradually, and here we are.
Right. There's, yeah, like in 2008, 2009, and prior to that, with regard to any time there was a national economic problem, eventually it hits certain states and certain economies. In many cases, not as hard in Western New York and in New York in general in some cases. This one, because it's a pandemic nature, obviously is both national, but very much focused on the things that the state itself is trying to do to deal with exposure and both reduction and also control as far as further cases are concerned. So that's what's really ratcheted down what for us is, things in normal operations that generate things like sales tax. Particularly, restaurants, motor fuels, a lot of the other businesses, out on Veterans Memorial Drive, with the exception of, say, a Home Depot and obviously Walmart and Target, to the extent that they have the ability to be considered essential businesses. But everything else pretty much is lock, stock, and barrel, not happening. And that's where, for us, sales tax is a major generator.
So, anything out there on the horizon that's a bright spot? Anything coming from federal government, state government?
The only thing we know at this point is, and it hasn't gotten any clearer in the last 5 to 6 days. The stimulus package number 3 does not have for county government much implication. Stimulus package number 2 is where the Medicaid money and the FMAP percentage going up between 6 and 12% has implications for New York State and county governments because of our weekly share. So to that extent, once the governor and the federal government decide to put aside their broadswords with regard to stimulus number 2, then the counties would see potentially a benefit with regard to our weekly shares of FMAP, which could potentially save about $1.6 million in terms of that annual cost of that one line item in our current Genesee County 2020 budget. Problem is, obviously, we're already 3 months into our fiscal year, and it's not likely, we're not sure yet whether or not even that federal stimulus number 2 bill and the FMAP will go back to January 1st of 2020 or start, at the point where the state has adopted it into their new budget, or the governor has decided that it's not worth it because he's not seeing enough other money coming from the feds. Therefore, it could literally go in his budget adoption as to the plan he submitted a couple weeks ago, which was the county's local share starts to become uncapped, which means it goes up.
Is there any aspect to this that makes it more difficult not having a representative in Congress right now?
I don't think so. I will say that from my own personal perspective, I believe particularly Senator Schumer has been a stalwart advocate of all New York State counties. He did it back when the ERA funding came out, when the last stimuluses back in the early 90s, mid-90s came out. He's always made sure that county governments, because of our weekly share of Medicaid expense and that line item in our budget, that we've always had, so to speak, a seat at the table. Really, it's an advocate, in terms of the United States Senate. Senator Gillibrand has been the same way. And so realistically, I don't believe in this particular aspect, in this particular crisis, that we have seen a loss by virtue of not having a member in the 27th district.
Is there anything you're doing at this point as far as cutting expenditures?
What we've done is we've asked the departments to start looking at, and we've already started not filling certain vacancies, deferring and delaying some of those things, particularly if they're totally 100% county funding. We've also started to look at where we can rein in expenses. Obviously, we got 42% of our workforce at work, including our emergency management and Department of Health and deputy sheriffs and the other members of the sheriff's department. So again, their continuous operations, we will not touch them because they have been granted, I guess, what we'll call essential emergency services status. So it's the rest of our workforce that we're also controlling with regard to, where they are. And they're obviously, with many of our buildings closed to the outside, or in a couple of cases, there's almost nobody on a daily basis in some of our buildings. Our operating expenses, we're saying we're going to control those things, and also look at what the future holds if this continues as to what we might have to do even further with regard to the percentage of workforce that is either at home and working or just at home and waiting for, whenever the recovery and the recuperation starts.
What's your assessment of how county government's functioning at this point?
It's on a bare bones basis, again, with the exceptions of Department of Health, Emergency Management, Sheriff's Office, which includes the jail, the road patrol, and communications. They're as usual at as I guess what we'll call full force and effect, doing their jobs, because that's primary in this community is is community safety and the integrity of upholding the laws of the state of New York and the United States. So in that regard, it's a lot of other areas. We're still obviously processing applications for public assistance and things of that nature, all being done remotely, documentation, things of that nature. The state has given us a little leeway in terms of renewing people, not necessarily having them have to come in and do all this additional or re-up some of their benefits. Obviously, in part of the federal stimulus, there'll be enhanced SNAP benefits. Obviously, also in terms of unemployment, some enhanced benefits for people who apply. But again, even our Job Development Bureau is on a skeleton staff of 2 to 3 people a day. But again, trying to answer phones and also provide some level of questions and answers for people. And in some cases where we can assist them to do their needs or their applications with us remotely, is suggesting they do that. And as of tomorrow, we'll actually be bringing back a couple of our DMV and possibly some of our county clerk staff to do in-office only employee activity. Again, because there's paperwork and questions that can be answered. So again, we are running on what I would call a skeleton staff. And obviously, the courts have already decided that they're going to stay out probably through, I think it's April 15th. So again, even our DA and our public defender are working on minimalist staff over there. Again, because there is no court activity and therefore nothing to, quote unquote, technically prosecute or defend on a daily basis.
Good. Well, appreciate your time, Jay. Is there anything else you wanted to inform us about?
Well, again, like I said, I know that we'll be putting out more information as we keep changing the face of county government or adjusting what we're doing services-wise. I think you probably just got a new revised update of our departments by contact numbers and also emails. If people need to get a hold of us. Like I said, we try to also, because we have given, I think there's 150 people who are now working remotely. So our IT department has been stretched in terms of providing both that access. But understand there's some of our department heads who live in communities where the internet is still, in the future, or they barely have dial-up service. And it's unfortunate because, Albany keeps telling us that 95% of the state of New York has high-speed internet, or whatever they're defining that, as. And that is certainly not the case in Genesee County, and something that we're also trying to work on with regard to how we work with the private providers and some of the other broadband funding to try to make that closer to reality in a lot of our more remote communities around the periphery of Genesee County and our 500 square miles.
Good. Well, I appreciate your time, Jay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure, and also me getting to work Skype a little bit better.
As I've been talking, a lot of people are learning new skills, and I'll tell you, several
absolutely. Even old dogs like me, Howard, can once in a while learn a new trick.
We're going to bring you into the 21st century yet.
Somehow.
All right, Jay. Good seeing you, even if virtually.
Adios. Take care, Howard.
So this is Howard Owens with the Batavian. Sign off another live stream interview. We appreciate Jay Gsell's time, and we'll have the county briefing coming up. I think it's at 4 or 4:15, and that'll be live. So, and we'll keep updating you with what's going on. Take care.